This is an N52 engine, and it has Vanos solenoid faults or Vanos sticking faults. Vanos solenoids control oil pressure for the Vanos units. The Vanos units control the camshaft position. The Vanos system actually can enhance emissions management, increase torque output, improves idle quality, improves your fuel economy. I've seen quite a few problems with Vanos solenoids. I've seen them cause idle issues just after a cold start, putting the vehicle into reverse or drive. I've also seen stalling issues where the vehicle won't even start. It will crank and not start, or it will crank and catch and stumble and stall. I've even had that happen without any fault codes. Some typical fault codes are for Vanos sticking, like P2A82 and P2A99, or P1554. I've also seen those faults caused from a loss of oil pressure from the Vanos units themselves. The loss of oil pressure is actually caused from a bearing ledge issue on the #1 cam journal, caused by wear from what's called a hook ring seal. And it creates a ledge which creates an oil pressure loss to the Vanos units, which can also set the same faults. The only way to check for that would be to remove the valve cover and on the intake remove the #1 bearing cap, and for the exhaust you have to remove the exhaust camshaft. And if there's any damage or you have a decent lip, then depending on the situation, just the bearing ledge would be replaced on the exhaust, and in some cases the cylinder head does need to be replaced if it's on the intake side. This is what a Vanos solenoid looks like. The part number is 11-36-7-585-425. And these solenoids are interchangeable from intake to exhaust. Basically, it's just a power and ground signal which opens and closes the solenoid, which changes the oil flow. And it has a gasket here and this larger gasket on the back side. And they basically just slide in and is held down by a 10mm bolt. One thing that you can do while you're diagnosing Vanos solenoids is, if you only have a problem on one side, you can swap them from intake to exhaust, because they are the same part number. And if your fault moves to either intake or exhaust, depending on where you had the fault, if it follows, then you can assume that your Vanos solenoid is bad. If it does stay on whatever side you originally had the problem, then your issue might be a little bit deeper, and the hook ring seal bearing ledge would need to be checked. The Vanos solenoids are located right in front of the engine. This is on an X3, so I have to remove this piece right here and this plastic cover here. It's held down by T30 Torx screws. I have to take these off first and remove this front panel. These ended up being a little tight. I think I need to charge up. with those 4 T30s removed, and that's right on the front there. This comes right off. And there's some more T30s that you need to remove. You have one here and one here. And you have one right here and one right here. So 4 more T30s to remove. You can see this is actually a different thread. This is what came out of the front part. You can see it's a fine thread, and then these are coarse thread. So you don't want to mix these up. Pull this intake snorkel off here. This actually pulls out towards the back and pops right out. So that slides in like that when you go to reinstall. And make sure to hook it back up to this piece right here. This piece also just pulls up and out. If you want to move that out of the way, but we're going to be working down here in this area. So now with that intake portion off, this is your Vanos solenoids. The top one is for your intake, and the bottom one here is for the exhaust. And right there is the 10mm bolt that holds that on. And there's my plug connection. Just take note of the routing. This one is right in front, and this wire runs actually behind. So when you pop the solenoid on, put your wiring for the exhaust behind the solenoid when you reinstall. To unplug these solenoids, press in on the spring retainer right here. It's going to be the same for both. And you have access to the harness here. So you just have to hold the spring retainer in, and a lot of times if you just wiggle it, you can go ahead and disconnect it just like that. Sometimes you do have to use a little bit of a screwdriver to help push these down if they're stuck on. And the same thing with the exhaust one. I'm going to press and hold and try to finagle that one off as well. Okay. You don't want to mix these up, so you could do one at a time. You could look at the routing. Remember, both of these go behind. But this is the exhaust one right here. It does come right out, and it sits just like that. I'm just going to put that over here and leave my intake one down here because that's the shorter one. And you really can't mix them up. Well, you can. You could put that one there and plug the other one in on the other side, but as long as you remember that the short wire that goes into the harness is for your intake, you'll be all set. So this is the intake solenoid right here, and this is the 10mm bolt that holds it on. So you're going to go ahead and remove that 10mm bolt. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and remove that. Once it's loose. You can just take it out with your fingers in most cases. Sometimes they're stuck and you have to pry them out a little bit, but if you just grab the connector end, give them a good tug, usually you can work them free. This is the solenoid. Make sure that the O-ring comes with it, or else you'll have trouble installing the replacement solenoid. Okay, I'm going to remove the exhaust one. I'm going to be replacing both on this, although the problem only was on the intake side. It's a good idea to replace both. In most cases, you'll only need to replace the solenoid, though I have seen problems with the bearing ledge. Same thing for the bottom one. Hopefully this one pops out. Yep, comes out pretty easy. And you can see the O-ring stayed in. Right there. There's my solenoid. So here are the two old solenoids, and this is the new solenoid. It's a good idea to put a little bit of assembly lube on the O-ring. You can use a little bit of oil, and that's going to help it slide into place when you're reinstalling. You can also use petroleum jelly. That seems to work really well. Okay, that's where the exhaust one goes into. That's the bottom right here. And just take my solenoid and slide it in. And try to line up where the bolt is going to go. And give it a good push in and a wiggle. Boom. Click. Nice and solid. And then I can still rotate this until I line it up where my 10mm bolt's going to go in. And I can wiggle this to get it to seat without causing any damage to the threads. Okay, put your bolt in. Tightening torque is only 9 Newton meters for those of you that like to have everything exact. Basically just going to snug them down. And that's the exhaust one installed. The intake one's harder to see because it's up under here. But same idea, I'm going to slide that in next. And remember my exhaust wire's up here. And I want to remember to route. You can see that that's still behind. Alright, there's my solenoid. There's the 10mm bolt, and my wiring is behind the solenoid. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and plug this in. Sometimes it helps if you push this down when you lock it in. This is just the spring retainer. You can see how it's going to hold on the two sides. When I push the spring in, it pushes down the locking tabs on the two sides. So I want to route that down underneath and behind. Let's see if I can get some light on there. It has a locator, but you can't install it backwards. Press that and lock it into place. Make sure your wiring is good. There we go. Okay, now I'm going to install the intake. Before I install the intake, I'm not sure how well you can see that, but that right there, that shiny silver part, is the solenoid. You see how it goes through the front timing area and pushes right into another opening. Now I'm going to go down here, see if you can see inside. Right, you can see that that front part's actually open. That's where the solenoid sits, and it has to push into that other hole right there. You want to make sure that you seat them fully, and as you can see, this one doesn't stick out at all. It's flush basically with the front of the cylinder head. Okay, here's my second solenoid, which is going to be for my intake. I'm going to take this gasket off right here. And use a little bit of lubricant on the seal itself. And then slide that back on. And then go ahead and install that in. There it is. I'm going to try to line up the bolt hole. And carefully thread this in. Goes. Okay, tighten that up to 9 Newton meters. And install my wiring for my intake. Side solenoid. Push that, push it up, lock it into place. So I have my new solenoids installed, and at this point I could go ahead and start the engine just to make sure that everything's good. I need to open the garage door before I do that. Hopefully none of these faults come back for this particular vehicle, and this is just bad solenoids. Now on this X3, I do have to reinstall these components here. Okay, this should lock right back into place. Remember, these were the the coarse threads. I'm going to need to recharge this battery. Okay, just snug these down. Then I have this piece, which goes right in the front. And these are the fine threads. So you have 4 and 4. And that's basically it for doing this on an X3 E83 with an N52. You also have the solenoids on the N51 and the N52K, and similar problems, which the engines are very similar in general. On a BMW 3 Series E90, you won't have this piece to worry about, so it's a little bit easier. But on X3s, you do have to take that snorkel off to access the front. Thanks for watching. I hope that you only have to replace the Vanos solenoids themselves, and you don't have the deeper issue with the hook ring seals.